Ever feel like there's a massive gap between who you are and who you want to be? You're not alone. The truth is, your brain is wired to resist change, not because you're lazy, but because it's designed to conserve energy. The good news? You don't need willpower or discipline to bridge that gap. Tiny, almost imperceptible steps can rewire your brain over time. Stick around to learn how to make change stick without burning yourself out. Your brain isn't working against you. It's working for survival. At its core, your brain operates like an energy accountant, constantly looking for ways to conserve resources. This is why change feels so difficult. Every new behavior requires extra mental effort, and your brain instinctively resists this unnecessary expenditure. Think of your brain's wiring like paths in a jungle. The behaviors you do regularly become well-trodden highways, wide, clear, and easy to travel. New behaviors, meanwhile, are like faint trails barely visible in the undergrowth. Each time you repeat an action, you're not just performing a task, you're carving out a neural pathway. The more you use it, the stronger and more automatic it becomes. This is how habits form. Take brushing your teeth. You don't consciously think about each motion anymore. Years of repetition have turned it into a well-paved neural highway requiring practically no mental effort. Studies show that the basal ganglia, a deep brain structure, plays a key role in this process by shifting actions from conscious effort to automatic behavior. But here's the catch. Your brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. It simply reinforces whatever gets repeated. When you try to exercise more or eat healthier, you're essentially hacking through dense vegetation to create a new trail. The first few attempts are slow, exhausting, and discouraging because your brain registers this as wasted energy. Hezbollah explains why willpower fails. Pushing through resistance consumes enormous mental resources, triggering what neuroscientists call ego depletion, a temporary reduction in self-control after exerting mental effort. Your brain essentially goes into energy-saving mode, preferring the well-worn paths over the new, strenuous ones. Small steps work because they trick your brain. By minimizing the energy cost of starting, you bypass resistance. If you commit to just one push-up instead of a full workout, or one paragraph instead of a whole chapter, the mental barrier lowers significantly. Each repetition still reinforces the neural pathway, just like traffic wears in a new dirt road over time. The key is consistency, not intensity. Short, frequent sessions actually build habits faster than occasional heroic efforts because they provide more repetitions for your brain to learn from. This is why people mastering skills often practice in multiple short bursts rather than marathon sessions. Brushing teeth became automatic because we did it daily without fail. The same principle applies to any habit. The more regularly you perform an action in the same context, the quicker your brain automates it. Research suggests it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for behaviors to become automatic, with the average around 66 days. This variability explains why some habits stick faster than others. Simple actions like drinking water after waking up might become automatic quickly, while complex skills like playing piano take longer. The more mentally demanding the behavior, the more repetitions your brain needs to encode it as a habit. Working with your brain means understanding its limitations. Your frontal cortex, the part responsible for self-control and decision-making, gets tired quickly. That's why habits stored in the basal ganglia are so valuable. They run on autopilot without draining your willpower reserves. Every habit you successfully establish essentially outsources a behavior from your limited willpower to your automatic systems. The implications are powerful. If you're struggling to stick with something, the solution isn't trying harder. It's making the behavior easier to repeat. Reduce the steps required, lower the mental effort, and create clear triggers. This is how tiny changes compound into significant transformations over time. Well, consider how you learned to tie your shoes. At first, it required total concentration, remembering each step, fumbling with the laces. Now you do it without thinking, while carrying on a conversation. That's the power of repetition and automation. The same process can apply to nearly any behavior you want to master. The trick is starting small enough that resistance never kicks in. If running 3 miles feels impossible, walk around the block. If writing a book overwhelms you, write 1 sentence. These tiny actions may seem insignificant, but each one is another pass over that new trail in the jungle of your brain. Your brain's resistance isn't a flaw, it's a feature. By understanding how it works, you can design changes that stick. Instead of fighting your nature, you're working with it. Every small repetition is another carving on that path between neurons, another step toward making the behavior automatic. So how do we actually start building these new trails through consistent repetition? The answer lies in understanding the critical difference between routines and habits. 2 concepts most people confuse, but that operate by completely different rules. Most people think routines and habits are the same thing. They repeat actions consistently, so what's the difference? The key distinction lies in how much mental effort they require. A routine is something you choose to do, like following a recipe step by step. You're actively thinking through each instruction, measuring ingredients, and checking the timer. It hasn't become automatic yet. Habits, on the other hand, bypass conscious decision-making altogether. Locking your front door when you leave the house doesn't involve checking a mental checklist. You just do it without thinking. Your brain has automated the process so thoroughly that you might not even remember doing it 10 seconds later. Picture a toddler learning to walk versus an adult strolling down the street. The toddler focuses on every movement, placing one foot carefully in front of the other, wobbling with effort. The adult? Their body handles walking while their mind drifts to dinner plans or a conversation they had earlier. That's the difference between a routine, conscious effort, and a habit, automatic behavior. So why do so many routines never turn into habits? Researchers studying automaticity found that a behavior needs to be repeated consistently in the same context before the brain shifts it into autopilot. The exact number varies, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, but the trigger is what makes it stick. If you always put on your running shoes before breakfast, eventually just seeing your shoes makes you reach for them without deliberation. A common mistake is relying entirely on motivation or discipline to sustain a routine, like forcing yourself to meditate every morning through sheer willpower. That's akin to using a detailed planner for something your brain should eventually handle on its own. Eventually, willpower runs out and the routine falls apart before it becomes a habit. Take brushing your teeth. You don't debate whether to do it each night. It's just part of getting ready for bed. The cue, finishing dinner, changing into pajamas, triggers the action so reliably that skipping it feels strange. That's the endpoint you want for any new behavior. The transition from routine to habit hinges on pairing the behavior with a specific signal, like always reading a book when you sit in your favorite chair, or doing push-ups right after your coffee finishes brewing. Over time, the context does the heavy lifting, not your willpower. This explains why gym routines often fail when they rely on motivation alone, but stick when tied to existing habits like going straight after work every Thursday. The consistency and context train your brain to expect the workout, making it progressively easier to start. But triggers alone aren't enough. They must be paired with actions that are simple enough to repeat without friction. If you want to start running, lacing up your shoes and stepping outside might be the only necessary first step. Eventually, those triggers, shoes plus doorway, will pull you into the full routine. The surprise here is how minimal the initial action can be. Flossing one tooth might seem pointless, but it's more effective than planning an elaborate dental routine you'll abandon in a week. Tiny actions reduce resistance, making repetition, the real driver of habit formation, far more likely. So instead of white-knuckling your way through routines, focus on engineering triggers that make behaviors inevitable. Once the brain recognizes a predictable pattern, like after X, I do Y, it starts automating the process. That's when effort fades into the background and the habit takes over. This shifts the entire approach to change. Rather than battling your brain's resistance, you're giving it clear, repeatable signals that eventually turn conscious actions into unconscious ones. And once you understand how triggers automate behavior, the next step is making those triggers impossible to ignore. The most overlooked aspect of building habits isn't willpower or motivation, it's triggers. These are the invisible cues that prompt behaviors without conscious thought. Think of them as the start button for automatic actions. Your brain constantly scans the environment for signals linked to familiar routines, like how your phone buzzing triggers you to check it. Most people use triggers poorly because they rely on vague intentions. I'll exercise sometime today, rather than concrete cues. Without clear signals tied to specific contexts, the brain defaults to existing habits. Research on cue behavior associations shows that actions are far more likely to stick when anchored to consistent triggers in your environment or daily routine. Defense-effective triggers follow a simple formula. They're specific, immediate, and tied to existing patterns. For example, placing your workout clothes next to your bed the night before creates a visual prompt that makes morning exercise more likely. The clothes aren't just preparation. They act as a physical reminder that reduces the mental effort needed to start. Studies on habit formation find that environmental cues like these can increase follow-through by up to 40% compared to relying on memory alone. Another powerful trigger bundle is time plus location. Saying, "I'll meditate at 7:30 a.m. at the kitchen table" works better than "I'll meditate sometime today," because it links the behavior to concrete sensory cues: the morning light, the smell of coffee, the feel of the chair. Over time, merely sitting at the table at that hour can trigger the meditation habit automatically. This principle explains why people often feel off when they skip ingrained habits tied to specific contexts, like brushing teeth before bed. Behavioral scientists call this phenomenon context-dependent repetition. The more consistently an action occurs in the same setting, the stronger the association becomes between the environment and the behavior. Fitness trackers exploit this by using vibration alerts as artificial triggers. The buzz becomes a learned cue to move after sitting too long. But the most effective triggers are those already embedded in your daily flow, like always doing squats while coffee brews or reading during your commute. Poorly designed triggers fail because they don't account for the brain's preference for automaticity. Setting a phone reminder to "write more" is too vague. The alert doesn't specify where, when, or how to start. Compare that to placing a notebook and pen beside your breakfast plate each morning. The visible materials, paired with an established routine, eating breakfast, create a frictionless invitation to write while you sip your coffee. This explains why research finds that people who implement if-then planning, if it's 3 p.m., then I'll do 5 push-ups, triple their success rates compared to those relying on motivation alone. Widening environments showcase trigger effectiveness clearly. Nurses who adopted the habit of sanitizing their hands before and after patient contact increased compliance from 38% to 87% when hospitals placed sanitizer dispensers directly in doorways. The doorway itself became the trigger. Passing through it automatically prompted the cleaning routine. Similarly, office workers who kept water bottles on their desks drank significantly more water than those relying on remembering to visit the water cooler. The key insight is that triggers work best when they piggyback on existing habits rather than requiring new routines. Want to start flossing? Place the floss on top of your toothpaste tube. The act of picking up toothpaste will remind you to grab the floss too. This habit stacking technique leverages established behaviors as built-in triggers for new ones. Research suggests stacking increases habit retention rates by making the new action feel like a natural extension of something you already do automatically. Surprisingly, emotional states can also serve as powerful cues. Some people find they write most consistently when slightly irritated or restless. Those feelings become the trigger to open their notebook. Others use boredom cues during idle moments, waiting in line, commercial breaks, as prompts for mini habits like posture checks or gratitude notes. The more you consciously pair a specific internal state with a desired action, the more reliably that state will prompt the behavior over time. Designing foolproof triggers involves 3 steps: specificity, immediacy, and sensory engagement. Read more fails as a cue, but place my book on my pillow every morning works because it creates a visual trigger visible at bedtime. Similarly, practice Spanish is vague, but open Duolingo when my lunch arrives links the behavior to a predictable daily event with clear sensory markers, the sound of delivery, the smell of food. Defiance, the strongest triggers combine multiple sensory cues. A workout trigger might involve laying out clothes, visual, playing a specific playlist, auditory, and using a distinct pre-workout scent, olfactory. This multimodal approach creates overlapping associations that make skipping the habit feel more disruptive than following through. The concept of starting small often gets dismissed as lazy or ineffective, but neuroscience shows it's actually the most reliable way to build lasting habits. The friction reduction principle explains why. Any action that requires significant effort or decision-making faces resistance from our energy-conserving brains. Studies on behavior initiation reveal there's a cognitive threshold, the point at which an action feels easy enough to start without deliberation. Most failed habit attempts crash against this threshold by making the initial steps too demanding. A common mistake is designing actions based on idealized outcomes rather than realistic starting points. People often plan to meditate for 20 minutes daily when they've never practiced mindfulness before, or commit to hour-long workouts despite being sedentary. This violates what behavioral scientists call the law of least effort, our natural tendency to choose the path requiring minimal energy. The 2-minute rule counters this by suggesting you scale any new habit down to a version that takes just 120 seconds. Want to read more? Start with 1 paragraph. Aspiring runners? Just put on your shoes and step outside. Flossing 1 tooth exemplifies this principle perfectly. While it seems absurdly small, research shows people who start with this micro-commitment end up flossing more teeth over time compared to those attempting full dental routines from day one. A study tracking dental habits found the one-tooth group maintained flossing 58% more consistently over 6 months. The tiny action bypasses resistance by eliminating excuses. No time, it's one tooth. Tired, it takes seconds. The brilliance lies in how this minimal start builds momentum. Most people continue once they've begun, but the psychological barrier to starting shrinks dramatically. Behavior initiation thresholds vary by person and activity, but studies suggest a clear pattern. Actions perceived as requiring less than 3 minutes of effort see significantly higher compliance rates. This explains why laying out gym clothes the night before works. It reduces the friction of preparing them when sleepy. Pre-portioned healthy snacks outperform bulk containers not because of portion control, but because they lower the effort needed for each healthy choice. The key insight is that repetition matters more than intensity for habit formation, and small actions get repeated more often. The physics of habit formation mirrors Newton's first law. Objects in motion stay in motion. A body at rest, on the couch, tends to stay at rest, while a body in motion, walking to the running shoes, tends to stay in motion. Tiny actions exploit this by providing the initial push required to overcome inertia. Software developers use this principle when implementing zero-click features, actions that complete automatically unless stopped. Applied to habits, it means designing starts so frictionless they happen before resistance surfaces. Automatic bill pay succeeds where manual payments fail for the same reason. Environmental design amplifies this effect. People who sleep in workout clothes report higher morning exercise rates, not because of motivation, but because they've eliminated the friction of changing. Research on choice architecture shows that minimizing steps between intention and action increases follow-through by up to 300% for some behaviors. This explains why keeping a water bottle at your desk leads to better hydration than walking to the kitchen for each glass. The reduced effort makes repetition inevitable. The compound effect of small starts appears counterintuitive, but proves powerful. Doing 2 push-ups daily seems pointless until you realize that's 730 push-ups yearly, with near zero willpower expenditure. Microscopic actions compensate for their size through perfect consistency, something grandiose plans almost never achieve. A study on language learners found those practicing just 5 minutes daily outperformed binge learners in retention tests 3 months later. The brief but regular sessions avoided cognitive overload while cementing neural pathways through spaced repetition. Momentum builds through successive approximations. Early stages focus solely on establishing the trigger-action connection. Sit at piano bench, play 1 note, with gradual increases only after the base habit stabilizes. Behavior analysts call this shaping, where small approximations toward the target behavior get reinforced first. Marathon runners often begin with run-walk intervals measured in seconds, not miles. The critical factor is maintaining the habit loop, trigger, tiny action, reward, until it becomes automatic, before increasing difficulty. Activity trackers demonstrate the power of microstarts. Most users initially dismiss stand for 12 hours hourly reminders. Yet data shows these nudges significantly increase movement over time. The alerts work because standing for 5 seconds feels negligible. But that minimal action often leads to stretching, walking, or other beneficial movements. The tracker's genius lies in making the starting point smaller than the resistance threshold. Interestingly, diminishing returns apply to habit formation. The difference between doing nothing and doing something minuscule matters far more than between doing something small and something large. Going from 0 to 1 push-up builds more habit infrastructure than going from 50 to 100 push-ups because it establishes the pattern. Psychologists find that completing micro-actions creates cognitive dissonance. People naturally want to align their self-image with their actions, making them progressively more likely to expand the behavior. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development applies here. The sweet spot where a task is challenging enough to engage, but easy enough to avoid overwhelm. Micro-habits position the entire challenge below this zone initially, ensuring guaranteed success that builds confidence and automaticity. Only after the basic habit forms do you gradually stretch the boundaries outward. One unexpected benefit of tiny starts is their stealth advantage. Because they provoke no internal resistance, they avoid triggering the brain's threat detection systems that normally sabotage major changes. Large commitments often activate self-sabotage mechanisms rooted in our fear of failure or success, while laughably small actions fly under the radar. One action groups to do that part of the opportunities factor are Shan. It's initiating or first ray script evit the ideas and gauge to unscape. So, this is not stealth and what deal. Not recommend a very baby A increase of sabotage. One is across men a few more times from not fear from self. Unwelcome actoring comments in microhabit, with people of mer down raised worse, or leading standing a proximaliers is a share to building the fear to nos, or your proximaliers reality respond. You can naturally building to be share to be things in your possible. In additional supply significant release the proximaliers, often damage opportunities has not crossed the many them, or while to cache the many is that schedule ideal for many time. What's my question? The resulting down, but we stebocate in ourself possible, has in managed before begins of the men. The Tory of line man became fueling that is the proximal area's guide. The men of talking about what they did, productivity research reveals similar patterns. Employees who begin tasks immediately, even with trivial starting actions like opening a document, complete projects faster than those waiting for optimal conditions. The act of starting creates psychological commitment that pulls people deeper into the task, much like how eating one chip makes continuing easier than stop.
The truth is, your brain isn't working against you. It's just following evolutionary programming to resist sudden change. Lasting transformation doesn't come from willpower battles or overnight overhauls. It happens through consistent, tiny steps aligned with how your brain actually forms habits. Start small, so small it feels almost meaningless. That single push-up, that one sentence written, that minute of meditation, they're the repetitions that quietly rewire your automatic behaviors. The key is persistence, not intensity. Pick one micro action today and repeat it consistently. Future you will look back not at a dramatic transformation, but at the steady path that got you there.